Chapter 24: The Cold War at Home and Abroad, 1945 to 1961. Put two dates on the table, 1950 and 2001. In both, Washington responds to a shock, Korea, then September 11th, by massively expanding the national security state, accepting real trade-offs in civil liberties, and telling the public the country is locked in a global struggle that might never actually end. This chapter is where that pattern gets built permanently for the first time. We tend to teach the Cold War like it's a closed chapter. Communism collapsed, the Berlin Wall came down, roll credits. But most of what actually came out of these 16 years, the CIA, the NSA, a permanently massive peacetime military budget, never went away. It just kept the lights on and changed its enemy's name a few times. We're covering four things: how containment turned into a permanent national security bureaucracy, how the fear of communism got turned inward against American citizens, how the Cold War played out in the newly decolonizing world through coups the US still hasn't fully answered for, and how nuclear weapons and race intersected with the anxieties of the era at home. Let's get into it. Part 1: Containment and the Permanent National Security State. Diplomat George Kennan spent 2 tours in Moscow watching Stalin purge, exile, and execute anyone he considered a threat, and came away convinced the Soviet Union could never be a genuine partner. His solution, laid out in a famous 1946 telegram, was containment. Resist Soviet expansion firmly, wherever it appears, mainly through economic and political pressure rather than military force. Truman ran with the idea and almost immediately ran past Kennan's actual intent, something Kennan himself would later complain about publicly as containment got increasingly militarized. In March 1947, Truman goes to Congress and frames a civil war in Greece as democracy against totalitarianism, exaggerating the facts to get $400 million in military aid approved. That becomes the Truman Doctrine. The U.S. will now back anti-communist governments anywhere, democratic or not, a distinction that matters more than it sounds like it should. A few months later, the Marshall Plan pours $13 billion into rebuilding Western Europe's economies, partly out of genuine humanitarian concern, partly to make communism a less attractive answer to post-war desperation. Both moves work more or less as intended, and Western Europe's economies recover faster than almost anyone expected. Then containment gets a permanent bureaucracy built underneath it. The National Security Act of 1947 creates the Department of Defense, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the National Security Council, and the CIA, all in one law. The NSA follows in 1949, tasked with monitoring communications worldwide. When the Soviets test their own atomic bomb in 1949, and communist forces win the Chinese Civil War the same year, panic produces NSC 68, a policy document arguing in genuinely apocalyptic language that the Soviet Union threatens to impose its will over, quote, the rest of the world, and recommending a massive, permanent global military buildup to stop it, along with covert operations to destabilize Soviet satellite states from within. NSC 68 was a plan without a war to justify its price tag, until North Korea invaded South Korea in June 1950. The U.S. leads a UN-authorized force into Korea without ever asking Congress for an actual declaration of war, a precedent presidents have leaned on for every major conflict since. The war ends in 1953, roughly where it started, along the same line dividing the peninsula that still exists today. But it permanently reshapes the American presidency, expanding executive war powers in ways Congress never really claws back. That's the part worth sitting with. An emergency framework built to fight one specific adversary just doesn't go away when the adversary changes. The same architecture gets reactivated almost exactly after September 11th, 2001, with the Department of Homeland Security and the Patriot Act playing the role the National Security Act and NSC 68 played 50 years earlier. And it's the same architecture funneling weapons and intelligence support into Ukraine today, and coordinating NATO's eastward troop deployments, still running the exact same playbook against a different one in the 2020s. At some point, the honest question isn't, when does this emergency end? It's whether a permanent national security state, once built, ever actually agrees to stand down. Part 2: The Second Red Scare at Home, Fear of Communism. Fear of communism abroad turned inward fast. Truman signs an executive order in 1947 creating the Federal Employee Loyalty Program, which investigates federal workers for, quote, reasonable grounds to suspect disloyalty. The board never finds a single verifiable spy. It still fires 378 people anyway, based mostly on political opinions and personal behavior. And one specific category of those firings deserves its own spotlight: employees dismissed simply for being gay. on the theory that they were more vulnerable to blackmail, while straight employees having affairs faced no such scrutiny. Eisenhower formalizes this into Executive Order 10,450 in 1953, explicitly listing sexual perversion as grounds for exclusion from federal employment. Historians estimate this Lavender Scare cost at least 5,000 people their jobs, more people in raw numbers than the famous Red Scare it ran alongside. And it's a part of this story that rarely gets top billing, even though the security clearance logic behind it is the exact same logic that still surfaces in modern debates over LGBTQ people and classified work, and echoes uncomfortably in recent state-level fights over what teachers and students can even say about sexuality and gender in public schools. The House Un-American Activities Committee takes the hunt to Hollywood in 1947, hauling in screenwriters and directors and demanding they name names. 10 of them refuse, citing their First Amendment rights, and get blacklisted, fined, and jailed for contempt of Congress as the Hollywood 10. A young congressman named Richard Nixon builds his national career pursuing former State Department official Alger Hiss on espionage charges. And Senator Joseph McCarthy spends the early 1950s waving folders he claims list known communists in government. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, convicted of passing atomic secrets to the Soviets, get executed in 1953. Genuinely guilty in Julius's case, based on evidence declassified decades later, but tried in an atmosphere so hysterical that a fair hearing was probably never really possible. None of this apparatus, the informants, the loyalty investigations, the assumption that dissent equals disloyalty, actually shuts down once McCarthy himself gets discredited. The FBI spends 1956 to 1971 running COINTELPRO, a secret program explicitly designed to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize civil rights groups, anti-war activists, feminists, and when Edward Snowden leaked documents in 2013 revealing NSA programs collecting metadata on millions of ordinary Americans' phone calls, he was exposing the great-grandchild of exactly the same institutional habit. Treat an entire category of the population as a plausible security threat first and sort out the individual innocents later, if ever. The specific fear changes. Communists, black radicals, then terrorists, then whoever the algorithm flags today. The tool built to manage that fear just keeps getting handed down. Part 3. Decolonization, Bandung, and covert regime change. Global shifts. While Washington and Moscow squared off, dozens of former colonies were winning their independence and refusing to automatically pick a side. In 1955, 29 newly independent Asian and African nations meet at the Bandung Conference in Indonesia, condemn colonialism outright, and pledge non-alignment, refusing to be absorbed into either superpower's bloc. The United States refuses to even send official representatives. It's the birth of what gets called the non-aligned movement. And it's worth noticing that many of those exact same countries are the ones today grouped under the label Global South, and that a lot of them are, once again, visibly hesitant to line up cleanly behind NATO or Russia over Ukraine, for reasons that trace straight back to Bandung's original argument. Why should newly independent nations get conscripted into somebody else's Cold War, first or second edition? Where nations wouldn't align willingly, the Eisenhower administration increasingly just arranged for friendlier governments directly. In Iran in 1953, after Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalizes the British-controlled oil industry, a joint British-American operation overthrows him and restores the Shah to power, securing Western oil companies a major share of Iran's output in the process. Strategic resources. The following year in Guatemala, after elected President Jacobo Arbenz moves to redistribute unused land held by the American-owned United Fruit Company, the CIA engineers his overthrow too, installing a military government that helps trigger decades of civil war. Neither Mossadegh nor Arbenz was a Soviet puppet. Both were nationalists trying to control their own country's resources, which, in the language of NSC 68, was treated as functionally the same threat. Those two operations are not sealed history. Iran's government has treated 1953 as a founding grievance in its relationship with Washington ever since. Guatemala's coup helped set off a civil war and is a direct contributor to the Central American migration patterns still shaping headlines today. The same pattern repeats elsewhere. Eisenhower backs the failed grab for the Suez Canal, and the CIA has a hand in the death of Patrice Lumumba. And the basic playbook running through all of it, using covert means to remove a government while calling it a defense of democracy, is exactly what gets accused today. The uncomfortable question this era leaves behind isn't whether promoting democracy is good. It's how you tell the difference between promoting it and just protecting whoever's already profiting. Part 4. Nuclear Culture, Race and the Cold War at Home, the Atomic Age.